You are suffering from an extreme cognitive delusion. You are convinced you are a meaningless speck in a vast universe. But here is the brutal physical reality. From a strictly mathematical and physical dimension, every mundane action you take carries a permanent, world-altering destructive force, and you are entirely blind to it. It is exactly 7 a.m. A 28-year-old sits on the edge of their bed, staring blankly at a smartphone screen. The glass displays global market crashes and casualty statistics from a distant war. Their shoulders slump inward. The chest cavity barely rises. The respiratory rate drops precisely to 12 breaths per minute. An incoming call from their mother flashes at the top of the screen. They make no sound. The thumb swipes, severing the signal interaction immediately. The phone is dropped onto the mattress. Their physical body enters a state of clinical paralysis. Their brain has deceived them, convincing them that the physical motion of ignoring this call carries absolutely zero weight, zero impact in the grand machinery of reality. Why does our biological instinct so desperately erase our own significance, while simultaneously shielding us from a terrifying mathematical truth? Every expansion and contraction of your chest cavity is violently forcing this universe into a completely irreversible, new historical trajectory. You think this helplessness is some profound philosophical epiphany. You are wrong. This is not a modern existential crisis. The actual fatal mechanism is a biological defense protocol, triggered entirely by the modern data environment. The human cerebral cortex has not fundamentally upgraded in the last 100,000 years. Our neural processing circuits were designed for the physical boundaries of a primitive tribe. Roughly 150 people, the absolute Dunbar limit, in that strictly closed physical system. Every micro-action you took triggered immediate, visible survival consequences. Your brain evolved to process this rapid, localized chain of cause and effect. But here is the brutal physical reality. What you are forced to swallow today is a global flood of data, variables completely outside the boundaries of your physical intervention. These massive remote variables pour violently into your amygdala, causing a pathological chronic spike in your baseline cortisol levels. Immediately after, the dopamine pathways in your mesolimbic system are completely drained to prevent the total collapse of your psychological architecture. To stop you from dying of neural exhaustion over disasters you cannot touch, your prefrontal cortex executes a forced shutdown protocol. It actively severs your perception of your own agency. In clinical psychology, this is classified as severe learned helplessness. You violently brainwash yourself into believing you have no value, just to survive the crushing weight of global data. Watch closely how they react. A commuter walks through a crowded underground transit hub. Their peripheral vision scans a stranger weeping into their hands on a bench. In fractions of a second, the commuter's autonomic nervous system registers the physiological distress signal. The pupils dilate by less than 2 millimeters. The facial nerves trigger a microscopic spasm. But the central nervous system of this body is already failing. 10 minutes ago, it was forced to process 3 articles about irreversible climate tipping points. Data overload has overheated the empathy circuits. The brain instantly suppresses all empathetic hormone secretion. The commuter averts their gaze. Their walking pace is locked dead at an absolute mean of 1.4 meters per second. Not even a tenth of a second of deceleration. They move past that bench like a calibrated ergonomic instrument, actively neutralizing their physical presence to entirely evade the entanglement of the physical environment. This total paralysis of the nervous system creates a fatal local delusion. The individual begins to absolutely believe that their physical actions and daily choices have detached from the timeline of the universe. But this neurological severing mechanism is a pure mathematical lie. It acts like a massive curtain, deadly focused on hiding a colder, more brutal, and inescapable physical truth. A truth running right against your eyeballs. We all naturally understand the time machine paradox. If you travel back in time and crush an insect, the present world undergoes a catastrophic mutation. But here is the brutal physical reality. Our brains suffer from a highly lethal cognitive deficit. It completely fails to apply this strict determinism to the physical motions you are executing right now. The actual fatal mechanism lies in the computational logic of neural architecture. Humans process the causal relationship from the past to the present by relying heavily on the episodic memory consolidation mechanism in the hippocampus. This system violently compresses history, strips away all complex variables, and stitches together an extremely linear, tidy, and fake narrative. But when you try to calculate the physical trajectory from the present to the future, the brain must boot up high-energy prospective predictive coding. The physical universe strictly obeys thermodynamics and deterministic physics. This is the lethal law within chaos theory, the extreme sensitivity to initial conditions. The moment any microscopic physical variable is generated, it compounds exponentially within the environment. Your pathetic neuronal computing power cannot process the derivatives of even the next 3 seconds. To cover up this total computational collapse, your central nervous system makes a highly deceptive compromise. It brutally categorizes the future as random. It forcefully blocks the suffocating truth. The future is not random at all. It is an absolute physical necessity triggered directly by you. Your physical body just lacks the capacity to predict its trajectory. Watch closely how they react. A driver sits at a green light in a 4-way intersection. Their thumb hovers over a glass screen for exactly 1.8 seconds, solely to finish typing a final string of characters. They exhale carbon dioxide from their lungs, drop the device onto the leather passenger seat. The tip of their right foot depresses the accelerator pedal. Their vision locks dead ahead, without a single glance at the rearview mirror. Inside their cerebral cortex, this was an absolutely isolated, sterile moment. They ignorantly erase the massive physical collapse about to occur. This forced delay of 1.8 seconds has permanently rewritten the spatial coordinate system of this road network. Over the next 60 minutes, it spreads like a physical virus, forcefully altering the kinetic parameters of 400 different vehicles, completely restructuring the lane change frequencies and velocities of 400 families. Humans carry this chronic kinetic underestimation, deploying highly destructive micro-behaviors recklessly into an extremely volatile, hyper-connected physical network. And it gets worse. To truly comprehend the terror of this physiological blindness, we have to use a thermodynamic microscope to track a single, devastatingly mundane indoor decision, to observe exactly how it violently tears the human timeline apart. Any microparameter tampering in the physical environment forces an exponential, irreversible timeline bifurcation. It is a cold verdict, directly dictating the physical survival of future human individuals. The actual fatal mechanism is the thermodynamic conservation of information. Kinetic energy and cosmic information can never be permanently erased. When you cause a microscopic variable to shift physically, like simply consuming a negligible survival resource, the timeline of the entire reality system fractures strictly at that exact moment. The alteration of the material state is not deleted. It mutates into a highly concealed interference variable, conducting violently through the nerve endings of the reality network, and it gets worse. This physical disturbance directly triggers a terrifying physiological contagion cascade. A minor daily inconvenience instantly alters the baseline concentration of stress hormones in the target's body. The adrenaline in the bloodstream experiences a microscopic spike. This chemical shift immediately alters the vibration frequency of their vocal cords and directly triggers specific muscle groups in the facial action coding system. The orbicularis oris muscle around the lips contracts. The orbicularis oculi muscle tightens by a fraction of a millimeter. These facial spasms stab directly into the next person's brain through the optic nerve, forcefully activating the other party's defensive physiological state on a subconscious level, tampering silently all the way down, completely warping the decision making chain of the entire social network. Watch closely how they react. At precisely 12 p.m., a person stands alone in a kitchen and swallows the last few tomatoes. At 5 p.m., their roommate opens the freezer and discovers the empty container. In that fraction of a second, the roommate's systolic blood pressure spikes violently. The lungs force out a sharp, brief exhale. Because of this, they deviate from their pre-programmed neural routine, push the door open, and walking toward the convenience store exactly 240 seconds earlier. It is this absolutely precise 4-minute spatial displacement that nails them dead to a convenience store checkout counter and causes another unfamiliar customer lined up behind them to be forcibly detained in physical time for exactly 180 seconds. This forcibly delayed customer is an off-duty critical care emergency medical technician. This 180-second delay completely rewrites their highway ramp entry time, not only allowing them to precisely avoid a fatal multi-car pileup 3 kilometers away, but putting them at the crash site with millisecond accuracy. Their arms frantically compress the chest cavity of a dying body before the ischemic cascade causes irreversible brain tissue necrosis. Through pure physical compression, they forcefully pump oxygen-rich blood into the victim's cerebral cortex. The future lifespans of tens of thousands of people, basic medical breakthroughs that have not yet occurred, and the biological reproductive probability of several generations are completely locked in and rewritten just like that. And all of these massive, brutal historical consequences depended entirely on high noon, a single adult standing alone in a kitchen, their pathetic impulse control, and a microscopic craving for calories. If every simple physical movement carries this level of terrifying chain reaction destructive power, then the concept of changing the world is not some grand, noble spiritual pursuit. It is a permanent physical destiny you are forced to endure, simply because your physical body is still breathing. Unpredictability within a localized range absolutely does not equal zero impact on a macroscopic scale, as long as your physical body is operating. This is an extremely forced and never-ending world-building exercise. The actual fatal mechanism is this: whether on a biological or physical level, this universe simply does not possess a neutral state. Not a single motion is isolated. Even if you are just collapsing weakly into a chair, every discharge of your neurons is forcefully reshaping the synaptic structure inside your brain. Every gravitational displacement you make is continuously outputting absolute kinetic energy into the surrounding physical environment. We no longer need fabricated psychological comforts. We do not need any religious narrative to justify our survival, because according to physical constants, meaning itself is an absolutely objective entity. You are the active node, violently outputting variables into this massive chaotic system. Recognizing this cold physical fact will instantly force the collapse of the observer effect in your daily life. From strict mathematical logic, it is impossible for you to passively observe a system you are forcefully constructing with your own flesh. Watch closely how they react. A person stands in a crowded supermarket aisle. Their brain is suddenly struck by this massive, cruel physical truth. The heels of their leather shoes are instantly nailed dead to the floor tiles. The airway begins to constrict. The ventilation rate of the chest cavity drops sharply. They slowly lower their head, staring dead at their knuckles, tightly gripping the plastic shopping basket. Then they turn around, stepping into the zone right before the checkout counter. This time, their pupils execute an extremely precise micro-adjustment of focal length. Locking dead onto the retina of the cashier, they begin to deliberately mobilize the nerves and muscle groups of their neck, forcefully altering the acoustic properties of their vocal cord friction, projecting a carefully calculated wave of acoustic signals into the environment. They are clinically aware that the airflow erupting from their oral cavity is violently tearing through the cashier's neural defenses, forcefully tampering with the dopamine secretion concentration in their bodily fluids. And this chain of incredibly faint chemical mutations will absolutely and irreversibly reshape this cashier and every single physical interaction they have with 50 other human strangers over the next 10 hours. Nihilism is completely pulverized in this moment. Not even a fragment remains, replaced by something else. An extremely heavy, suffocating physical oppression. You are forcibly stripped of the privilege of being powerless. You can never escape. You must bear absolute joint liability for the architecture of future human history. We are finally backed into a brutally cold, objective binary, under the ultimate physical deduction. Either absolutely no one has any meaning, or every motion of every individual holds absolute dominance. The strict mathematical models of chaos theory lock in the latter. Your so-called legacy is not a bronze statue in a public square. It is not the code iterations within a banking financial system, and it is not a title on a corporate resume. Your true legacy is the absolute physical continuation of the reality universe. It is all the kinetic energy your physical body throws onto the timeline. It is every biological contrail produced by your metabolism. You are not just the execution program of your own fragile life. You are the blind architect of the grand history of humanity. Stop this pathetic psychological self-paralysis immediately. Stop searching for some grand, abstract goal for survival. It cannot save you. What you need to seize is the absolute control of every physical motion in your daily routine. Re-examine every hover of your fingertips. Recalibrate the frequency of every vocal cord friction. Stare dead at every microscopic material consumption you execute, and every brief physical interaction you have with any strange organism. Treat them as absolute physical inflection points that permanently tamper with human history. Your neural computing power truly cannot predict the distant, extreme mutations. But here is the brutal physical reality. You must take a terrifying, absolute ownership over the initial conditions you are injecting into this system right now. Reality is an extremely violent, chaotic system, and your physical body is the permanent physical engine of this system that never stalls. If you desperately want to see the operating mechanisms of these precision gears, if you want to see this cruel architecture you are blindly building, hit subscribe. Here, we only dissect the most deeply uncomfortable, objective truths of human existence. We will see you in the next timeline.